Good afternoon, everybody. These are the boy in the striped pajamas questions for chapter 12. Number one, where did Shmuel live before the camp? He had a very normal life. On page 126, I lived with my mother and father and my brother Joseph in a small flat above the store where Papa makes his watches. His father is a watchmaker, and they live above the store. Seems like very nice. Question two, how did life change for Shmuel before he was brought to the camp? This is another one of those things where we're getting the story, we're getting the experience of the Holocaust from a child's perspective. So we want to pay attention to some of these details. He comes home the one day, and his mother is making the armbands. And we talked about these from the Diary of Anne Frank. These were bands that all Jews were forced to wear to indicate to everybody that they were Jewish, so everyone would know who the Jewish people were. Right, it's a way of marking them. Then he says they wore the armbands for a little while, and then things changed again. He came home. I'm looking at the bottom of 127 to 128. He came home one day, and they said that they couldn't live in their house anymore. They were being taken away, and they were forced to live in another part of the city that Shmuel says is not very nice. Right, where they lived was nice, and this is not a very nice part. These were ghettos. This is actually where the term ghetto comes from. Is from the Holocaust. Jews, before being taken to the camp, they would be brought to another part of the city, taken out of their homes, and just sort of forced to live in these really bad neighborhoods. Shmuel talks about a big wall that they built around it. Right, they were forced to stay there. They couldn't leave. He talks about the terrible conditions that they live in. I'll talk about that in the next question. But then he says that things change again. The soldiers come, and they force them all onto these trains. This is another sort of important thing to know about the Holocaust and the experience of Jewish people during that time. They would be crammed onto these train cars, right? And it's not like a train like we think about it. It's like just a box, and there would be tons of people in there, and it would either be really, really hot or like really, really cold. They couldn't sit down. There was nowhere to go. They would just be stuck on these trains, and that was how they got taken to the camps. Number three, what different attitudes do the boys have about the armbands? This is another one of those ironic, kind of funny things in the telling of this story. The armbands are not good, right? It was something that they were forced to do to identify themselves as Jews, whether they wanted to or not. But Bruno feels left out. He's like, "Oh, I want an armband. Like that would be really cool to wear an armband." And he talks about the armband that his father wears, right? And that is the has a different symbol on it. That is the Nazi, the swastika, the Nazi symbol, and he wears that as part of his uniform. So he sort of compare those two. Bruno thinks it's like cool or something, and Shmuel realizes like, I never really wanted to wear an armband. It just made me do it. Question four. Bruno opened his mouth to contradict him. This is on page 128. Why doesn't he believe Shmuel's story? What he's not believing here is that when they were in the ghetto, there were 11 people that lived in this one tiny room. Not very nice, not very nice conditions. And Bruno doesn't believe this. He comes from a wealthy family. He's only ever known people who live like he does in big houses where everybody has their own room, and things are very nice. So from his very limited point of view, he can't possibly understand that other people may live this way or may be forced to live this way. It's something that's outside of his experience, and he can't believe it. Number five, what happened when all the soldiers came with the big trucks? On page 129. This is another one of those things that are important about the experience of the Holocaust. So I'm going to read the whole thing. Then one day the soldiers all came with huge trucks, continued Shmuel, who didn't seem all that interested in Gretel. They're talking about Gretel before, or Bruno's talking about Gretel. And everyone was told to leave the houses. Lots of people didn't want to, and they hid everywhere they could find a place. But in the end, I think they caught everyone, and the trucks took us to a train, so on and so forth. This is very powerful. By this time, the people in the ghettos knew what was happening to them. They knew where they were being taken and they knew what was going to happen. So they understandably didn't want to go. They did everything that they could to try and hide, to try and get away, to escape in some way. But the way that Shmuel tells it, despite their terror in trying to hide, the soldiers end up getting all of the people and getting them on the trains. Question 6. What differences do you notice between Bruno and Shmuel? There's not really any specific passage to point to here, but just overall impressions. I would say for me, Bruno, let's start with Shmuel. Shmuel, sad, right? When he starts talking about that we were just reading the train, it seems like he's about to cry. And he's very sad, but he tells his story, which is a powerful one, in just a very straightforward, matter of fact kind of way, right? He doesn't embellish it. He doesn't make things up. He just kind of tells it like it is. Very honest. Bruno is a little bit different. Some of you have commented in your questions, and I can certainly understand this. I feel this a little bit sometimes reading it too, like a little bit angry at him, because he's so oblivious to everything that's going on, right? And he only thinks about things from his own perspective, right? He wants to go on the other side of the fence to play with the children, with the other kids in the camp. You're like, no, you don't understand. Like that's not what it's like. So it could be a little bit frustrating as a character, a little bit selfish, a little bit of like a know-it-all too, right? He's always contradicting things that Shmuel says, and I find this funny the way that he thinks that Gretel is that way. Right, he thinks Gretel is always saying she knows everything, but he kind of is the same way, right? He also thinks that he kind of like knows everything all the time. We have to, I think, give him a little bit of latitude, though, right? He's 9, he's a kid. He just really doesn't understand what's going on. Question 7: Why does Bruno decide not to tell his family about his new friend? He's very excited. He's been alone all this time. He has nobody to play with, and finally he feels like he's making a friend. So he just can't wait to get home and tell everybody about it. But then he starts to think, well, if I tell them, then maybe they won't want me to go out there anymore. This is the quote for that is on page 133. He decides, if I tell them, they might forbid me from seeing him again. So I'm just not going to tell them.